Do me a favor. Don't go chasing waterfalls.
Was that accidental, or were you trying to quote TLC on purpose?
I don't even understand the reference.
You don't understand what you said?
I don't know what that is. Get out. Go.
Oh.
We enjoy wrestling.
Hey everybody, it's We Enjoy. Sorry, I'm stretching here. Oh,
wow,
getting in a good stretch. Oh, nothing beats a good stretch.
He was talking normal to me, guys, and then suddenly he's like, ugh.
I was just overtaken by the absolute urgent need to stretch. You know how that goes.
Sure.
This is We Enjoy Wrestling. We are the Mattitude Eric. I am Matt Fowler. Say hello, Eric Goldman.
Hello, guys. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
I'm stretching again. I can't stop.
Oh,
this is like some weird, like, X-Files disease tick. Like, Scully, Scully, these people can't stop stretching.
The end of our final episode is just hearing snapping on the other side.
Yeah, it's like they Mulder's like, they stretch and stretch and stretch until they rip themselves apart, Scully.
And then there's like a vague reference to weird sex stuff that Mulder does.
Yeah, he's like eating pistachios and and like there's just moaning in the background. Hey everyone, we are now on iHeartRadio. That was that's a new platform you can find us on, but
iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio. What do you know about iHeartRadio, Eric? It is a giant sort of radio app. I know they put on music festivals, and I think they're kind of like Sirius. They have their own channels and stuff like that. They have a lot of podcasts. So, but we're also on all the usual places too: iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, Pocket Cast. I don't know. I'm not going to name them all. I think I just did. But thank you, everyone, for subscribing to us and listening to us each and every week and rating us over on iTunes. If you haven't, please go over there and give us that 5-star frog splash rating and some nice words. Nothing new to report on that front this week. But before we dive into a very interesting week, we'll just say we'll give you our schedule for the rest of the year, which is that we will be doing a podcast next week. Like a year-end wrap-up. It might not be all that long. I always say that. I always intend that. It usually just goes an hour. Anyway.
You're a liar.
I am. I'm a stretching liar. And then also to talk about anything that happens on TV next week, though everything's also being pre-taped, which is great because it means that everyone and all the superstars can spend the holidays with their friends, families, loved ones, all that stuff, and they don't have to work on Christmas, which I believe they did last year, and it was like a big controversy, you know.
Yeah.
It was because, yeah, who's watching? Why is it so important for everyone to watch on? You know, it's traditionally the least watched episodes of the year are the ones that happen, well, next week. So, yeah, they're pre-taping everything. You can spoil yourself if you'd like.
I will say that I still chuckle. It was good slapstick comedy, Matt, years ago when Alberto Del Rio's car ran into Mick Foley dressed as Santa Claus.
Was it Mick Foley? I think it was just Santa.
I thought it was Mick Foley.
I think it was just a Santa. I think they had a
All
Santa
right,
there.
Even better.
I mean,
even better for just Santa.
There is a good chance that if you see someone dressed like Santa, it's Mick Foley.
Sure.
It's just the odds are in your favor that any random Santa you see could be possibly be Mick Foley because he loves Santa so much and he's usually dressed like that. But this was just an errant Santa. It was just a Christmas episode Santa. It's like, oh, he killed Santa, and I believe within the canon of WWE, Santa is dead. I think he's remained dead since that day. I don't think he's come back. You know, he got stunned by Stone Cold years ago.
Yeah.
And then he finally thought the coast was clear and that the waters were safe, and he came back and he was the victim of vehicular manslaughter.
This is WWE's version of the Santa Claus, and that's why Mick Foley must take up the mantle.
Well, you know, when Daniel Bryan walked out this week and sneered at the packages, the fake presents that they had at the entrance ramp on SmackDown, because of the waste, you know, he just resented that they wasted, you know, materials making fake presents for decorations.
Right.
I also would like to think that he was mourning. He was just still angry about Santa Claus being murdered on TV, live on television.
It's a bad memory, man. You know.
But yeah, so we will be doing a podcast next week, but then the week after, New Year's week, we will take a break. Just to give us a break, but also because I'll be gone most of the week, and then I'd have to do a lot of cramming catch up, and I don't even know if I could do it. I'll be in Orlando, so we'll take that week off.
The only other week we never did a podcast, I was in Orlando. So this is our tradition.
That's it. If we're in Orlando, we're not doing a podcast.
Right.
Orlando is a
strict rule.
No podcast zone. Before we dive into everything, very crazy week. Just like Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It's a crazy movie, part 4.
Yeah. This was a crazy week. Interesting as well. Tell your dad. Bryant from Minnesota writes in. He actually wrote in an email to us and then followed up with a secondary email letting us know where he was from, because he knows that's like my weird kink. I need to know where everyone is from. He just gave me the state. I don't need to know the city. I prefer to. Don't need it. You want to send me your home address? Fine. As long as your mailbox says Styles on it, I'm good. He writes in, Breezy does it. Hey guys, been a longtime fan since channel surfing. So this is a channel surf fight from the past. Just got into wrestling for the first time about a year ago, and now it's a passion of mine. Wow. I mean, that I feel like that's really daunting to jump into wrestling, like new watchers of wrestling. Because it's been around for so long, and because everyone who watches it are such pain in the asses. The fandom, it's not the greatest fandom to join in.
It can be tough.
I was so sad that both channel surfing and the wrestling wrap up ended before I got into wrestling, because I loved how you two would talk about the absurd world of wrestling with literally no context of his own. And I also really enjoy Matt's writing. I jumped for joy when I saw the two of you are making a wrestling-centric podcast, and it's terrific. Well, thank you, Bryant. Yeah,
thank you.
On channel surfing, occasionally, when something was big enough, we did do a segment, would devote maybe the end of a podcast occasionally to something.
Knowing that we were probably like making a good chunk of our audience just completely tune out or...
Yeah, that's why we would save it for the end, you know.
Right.
I hope so. Hope we did that.
I think we mostly did.
Bryant continues. The title of his email is Breezy Does It. So here's where that comes into play, where that wordplay comes into play. I have been loving Tyler Breeze's comeback tour. I don't know how much of a comeback tour it was, but he did wrestle a good match with Ricochet last week on NXT. It's one of those things where, you know, occasionally they'll bring someone back down to, or I should say back down. That sounds terrible. NXT is awesome.
Yeah.
But I say down also because they're going down to Florida. It's sort of like south. They send people down south to Florida, former NXT stars, back into the fold where they can put on actually a great match and be beloved. I remember when the Ascension got to go back and lose, but actually have a competitive match in front of a crowd that appreciated them. Yeah. And then also you'll see occasionally on NXT tours, they'll lend out people who maybe are NXT call-ups who aren't doing anything on the main roster. Like the last NXT show I went to, the Revival were there.
Yeah, and I saw Tyler Breeze, who, especially with Fandango out, I think he did a few of their sort of roadshows.
So this is actually interesting because Bryant's email feeds into something that Pete brought up last week when we had to Hulu-splain him over in Scotland. Because Breeze fought Dean Ambrose this week. So he got a sort of a spotlight match against the Intercontinental Champion. It says, I've been loving Tyler Breeze's comeback tour. I was hating the lack of screen time he was getting these past few months, and it's great seeing him work on NXT and Raw. I hate when they repeatedly squash talented wrestlers without there being a story element involved. Weird side note, on cable, Tyler fought a tough, intense 5-minute match in the Huluverse. It was edited to 1 minute. Eric, do you realize that you've been watching also edited matches?
I think there's been times where I've noted that probably was the case, that they were sometimes maybe coming into things. In fact, it happened this week, I believe, where I never know for sure, but in the Gauntlet match on Raw, like I didn't see Mickey's entrance. I think they cut out like a first segment, you know.
Well, what Bryant is suggesting here is they cut out most of, if not all of, Tyler's offense against Dean, and it made it look like a complete squash.
Ah, interesting.
So is Tyler forever trapped being squashed in the Huluverse? And I guess the answer is yes.
Maybe, but I don't know. Like you said, the Huluverse is a strange verse, where like lately, you know, with the fact that like the whole AOP and Rude and Gable, they'll be cut out completely some weeks, and then some weeks all their stuff gets in. So there's some back and forth sometimes, and some, you know, and I think this is just me guessing, but I think like this week's Raw was probably a little more creatively edited, especially because of the gauntlet match. Like once you have like the second half of the show be one thing, they probably got a little more, and not to say they never do that. I think it's just this week was one week where they had to probably be a little more sort of specific.
Side note, side quest, the reports are that the backstage producers for that gauntlet match, which took up the final hour of Raw this week, were Tyson Kidd and Jason Jordan.
Oh,
so that's just interesting thing to note there. Very quickly before we dive into a very strange week filled with some cool matches at a pay-per-view, followed up by a quote-unquote shakeup on Raw. I don't want to spend too much time talking about Todd Chrisley, but it occurred to us this past week also when we realized that there are things we talk about. Now that we know that 69% of our listeners come from the U.S. and the rest come from elsewhere, you know, when we talk about Eric's Hulu cut, we explained that last week. Mm-hmm. But the cut to Chrisley sign-off, that's the I don't want to call it a catchphrase, but something that's become the sign-off each week. They don't know what Chrisley knows best is. Like, they wouldn't know the American programming. Like, so Pete actually wrote on Twitter when I brought that up that he didn't know what it was.
Right. I mean, it's possible Chrisley Knows Best is syndicated around the world, but probably not.
But it wouldn't. But it doesn't mean it also doesn't follow Raw.
Yeah, that's almost certainly not happening. Yeah.
And it just also makes me take stock and realize how much nonsense is coming out of our mouths to our overseas listeners.
We can't think no disrespect meant to overseas listeners, but we'll drive ourselves mad if we focus on
that's what I'm doing. I'm driving myself mad. I've got I've got a yarn board of like conspiracy. So Todd Chrisley Knows Best is a reality show based on Todd Chrisley, who is supposedly a real estate magnate who's earned a lot of money. And so it's like a rich family in Atlanta, and he is somewhat of a Southern dandy, I guess is the best way to describe him. Mm-hmm. He is, you know, he's sort of effete in his mannerisms. He's a germaphobe. He's very obsessed about his appearance. And his kids are nightmares. And his wife puts up with him, and his mom's there. And I think it takes place in Nashville now. I don't think they're in Atlanta anymore. I'm not. A Chrisley expert out there, please explain it to us, or don't. Very briefly, very briefly, give us the rundown. But it has been a show that has become a sort of a big runaway hit for the USA Network, which currently airs Raw and SmackDown, which will no longer air SmackDown as of fall next year when it moves to Fox. But USA has actually all of NBC Universal has had both those shows for a while because SmackDown was on Sci-Fi. And then it moved to Raw. Then it moved to USA and was live on Tuesdays. But the running joke is that there are a lot of shows that you catch the final minutes of when you're waiting for Raw and SmackDown. So usually there's maybe it's a Law and Order or a Modern Family or an NCIS. A lot of those procedural shows, which I've never seen except for the final minutes of an episode because I'm waiting for these shows to start. And then the ones that follow. And for a long time now, it's been Chrisley Knows Best. Sometimes it's Shooter. Sometimes it's been other USA shows. But Chrisley is funnier because it's a much maligned show because it's ridiculous. And it is really obviously staged for a reality show. You know, I think that's just the way reality shows are now. There's really no attempt to make it seem not set up. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, it's a show. And it's got a guy named Chrisley in it, and there's going to be a spinoff. So it's going to the Chrisley-verse is ever expanding.
I will stop myself, Matt, from saying not all reality shows, but I just said it because we just came off such a good season of Survivor.
Well, so but would you consider Survivor? First of all, that's a reality competition show.
It's very different. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. All the shows that are like, let's follow this family. there is so much contrivance.
Whether it's
too.
the
Yes, but-
Kardashians or Hogan Knows
Yeah, yeah.
Best, or I mean,
It's like, let's
Chrisley
get
Knows
Total
Best
Divas
comes
that-
from Hogan Knows Best, comes from Father Knows Best.
Yeah.
So
Total Divas